decentralized and should be coming to Web3 very soon. I will let you introduce yourself briefly. Let's start by David.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is David Snyder. I am one of the co-founders at a project called Lit Protocol, which is a distributed key management network that provides developers the ability to sign things like transactions or any other data, as well as encrypt data, and have the keys managed by a distributed fault-tolerant network. In essence, what blockchains are doing for databases, our ambition is to do the same for KMS, or key management services.
Hey everyone, I'm Lucas. With Safe, we build a counter abstraction infrastructure, so that's tooling for creating programmable wallets, which is quite relevant in identity space, that you have a wallet that you don't lose the keys to, and where you ideally also have like a way to recover access to the wallet and so on. So like we just try to build the most secure way to store any kind of digital assets, including digital identities. Yep.
Hello everybody, my name is Alex, come from Barcelona, and basically I've been in blockchain since 2012. And the reason I'm here is because I was speaking with Luis about this, and I lost all my faith in digital identity at all. I don't believe in it, I don't trust it, I don't like it at all. Every time I'm working more on the document side, data, and every time that anybody asks me, this is this identity, no, it's not. Definitely it's not. So it's basically, I think identity right now it's focusing on the wrong problem, because I've seen a lot of really amazing technologies, by the way, to create, digital wallets for credentials. But the fact is, nobody has credentials. It's like, I'm going to build a bank, but nobody has money. So I think that we are focusing on identity, at least on the wrong problem at all. So the reason I'm here is just, bring up some debate.
Yeah, I see it's going to be controversial. Good.
It's good to make it controversial. Hey. I'm Altan. I work for the Near Foundation. Well, decentralized identity is very important for us. I guess we have a lot of sort of consumer apps that people come in and we want to prove that they are human, right? So we can talk about that. I guess we've been doing a lot of work with idOS on a couple of different apps that we have in the ecosystem. Some of them are actually the sort of the near tasks that we can talk later. But yeah, so great to have you guys in Istanbul. I'm Turkish, as I mentioned before. So yeah, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, all of you. Well, let's start by the basics. And I think it's something that we already talked in another panel, but there's many definitions to this. David, what's decentralized identity?
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's certainly a lot of frameworks for breaking this down. I think one way that we can talk about it is state versus key material. So if we even go back to the Bitcoin white paper in the preamble, the first sentence of the preamble or the abstract is, we need peer-to-peer cash. And then the second sentence of the Bitcoin white paper is, digital signatures provide part of the solution, but we also need fault-tolerant state machine, which was Bitcoin, that then was described further on. So for me, this is a really useful lens for thinking about identity, because when we think about decentralized identifiers like did docs, that's state, but then mutating that state, that requires keys. So I think we can define decentralized identity in the general sense as the combination of the two, and then of course those individual components break further down into other components, but delineating between signing material, essentially for authorization and authentication in identity, and then state associated with some identity, I think is a very useful way to get really clear around what you're talking about when you use terms that are widely applicable, like decentralized identity.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And why do we need decentralized identity for, though? Like, sure, you are empowering users to have their own data. That's something that I think it's good enough reason to make digital identity finally self-sovereign. But there are other benefits, or at least I think there are other benefits for decentralized identity. Lucas, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, generally, like how identity works is that you have, traditionally identity is like a collection of statements, of credentials that usually like centralized entity is assigning to a person or to a company. And so there's some attestation element, but also like a registry element, because this like, let's say this could be like a passport, it could be like a driver's license or a university certificate that gets issued by a government, by a university, by the government agency that issues driver's license. But they also get registered or kind of controlled by a certain entity. So what decentralized identity tries to achieve is that you have maybe still these centralized entities that are issuing these certificates or credentials, but they're captured on a decentralized stack, on a decentralized registry. This could be something like idOS, where then the control over this credential is not with a centralized identity, which just enables more portability of this credential. So you can, it's not something that maybe the driver's license is only kind of accepted in a certain region, but you can port it maybe over to a different region, or it creates composability. So another example is also like Facebook. Facebook has some element of an identity that you like aggregate there, but it cannot port this identity over to, say, a Twitter. You can, and like a decentralized identity approach aims to have this, the storage of the credentials be on a decentralized platform, which then allows you to have these identities ported over between different applications on top. But maybe this is something where Alex has strong opinions against.
Yes.
Well, I also think like, and it's an excellent frame, and this fundamental question of why, I think like for people who are building technology, it comes down to the pursuit of providing benefits, like the underlying idea around like entrepreneurship, and obviously doing so with the ideals of decentralization is great because you get to empower agency to individuals. But in this world that Lucas was just describing, there's a whole new set of applications that can be developed in the same way that when we all started walking around with cell phones in our pockets, there's a whole new category of applications that are possible. And then you could argue this back or forth, but in general, I think you could say that that has improved quality of life for individuals.
It could, but, and I agree, that's composability.
Right.
It's open, like all of traditional systems, you have to go there, and that's what they have, nothing else that you can do because they own the protocol, they own the system, whatever. But then, if we want to do that, we need to, at the beginning, I was speaking about this, honestly, like in 2014. And I was like trying to convince everyone that the centralized identity was the right way. And the way I was doing it, I was telling everybody, imagine right now, how many identities do you have? And everybody's like, oh, hundreds of them, Twitter, Facebook, I don't know. So imagine having just one. That was my dream. And a few years later, I just go back and I can ask like anyone on the Web3 industry, how many identities do you have? And they will say, okay, I have MetaMask, but I'm using, of course, Polygon. And then once again, they have hundreds of different options that they are not interoperable. We didn't achieve like this thing of like having a standard, having something that glues this together yet.
It's not only on the like micro level, right? Let's say, you know, I had medical records, right, or something like that, right, acquired in Turkey, moved to the United States, I lost those records, right? I don't know, like, what vaccinations I've had. Like, even it exists out of the blockchain world. I guess, like, the problem we're trying to solve is, like, how do you take all of that and make it together? Right?
Even if you have a verifiable credential of your vaccination,
exactly,
they will speak another language, so it doesn't matter.
They'll be like, what the hell is this? You know, like, you had to prove mathematically maybe something else that you'd done that, right? That's the way I think.
Yeah, and why do you think, Alex, that that's the case? Like, why do you think that we fail at creating this standard or creating a system that works for everyone? Is it human nature? It is someone's having some interest behind it?
No, I think it's human stupidity at its highest level. So my experience usually trying to achieve I try to create a standard with the European Commission and at least 500 companies on digital identity, and it was quite simple. It was a verifiable credential on education. I'm a tech guy. I open I open an editor. It's like, okay, we need a name, that's a string. We need a date. It's quite simple. My experience was that it took 3 years, and not even one single line of code was written. And during these 3 years, everybody was fighting on who was the most accurate kind of candidate to write it. So basically, it was all about ego. And I think the big problem is that we're trying to solve problem, something that could be at all, but we are always like looking at governments on the wrong side. We should not talk to experts about that. We should live like, I don't believe in standards at all. I do believe that people, they should build schemas, like GitHub. They should build schemas and let like the market adoption to be the ones that basically, you cannot make a standard. You can create a schema and let the market turn that schema into a standard. RC20 was made like that. It was not originally to become the standard. But then because we have that, we have composability of finance, and we have DeFi. Why cannot we do something similar for data?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, and there's a joke that I always make, which is like, we have 15 universal standards for identity, which means we have none. But yeah, I think it's a good point, and you touch on technology, for instance, and maybe someone else, like, do you think that the technology we have today, in 2023, can actually enable us to have now this joint identity layer, if you want to call it in some way, that we couldn't do some years ago?
Oh, of course, we have technology that can do that. I'm working on this kind of technology right now, and people, do you want to make a standards? I don't want to make a standards. I want to create a framework where we treat schemas as public goods, and then people can build these standards on top of that. I end up with the same questions, like who wants to write the standard? And then a lot of discussion, because there's a lot of platforms and everybody's like working on their own standard. So the only solutions probably right now is work on a technology that can translate the standards, schemas, some point. But technologically, we are there. My job, I think, always, everybody's afraid of technology. I'm afraid of people. I try to protect technology from people, not the other way around.
Good answer. Altan, I think this narrative has, however, changed in the last, I would say, year and a half. Identity was a infrastructure topic, very technical one. Then it jumped to be, in the past bull market, a DApp topic, because, well, people wanted to invest in launchpads.
Vitalik wrote about it
or
too.
Exchanges, exactly, yeah. But it seems that in the last year or year and a half, we have moved to make identity, again, a blockchain ecosystem topic. And we see ecosystems like Near, that you're working for, that actually have made a bigger stance with that, with FastAuth, or with being the first one to integrate the idOS, for instance. So why is that? Why it became a key topic for blockchains?
Yeah, so for us, I guess it starts with sort of the fundamentals of building Near, right? So we started building Near in terms of, I mean, I wasn't there, well, Ilya was there, so we wanted to make it usable, easy to use. We have an account model that's very, very easy to use, that you can program those keys to do certain things. And then we came to a point where, we started to have a lot of consumer applications like Sweat and Kaiching recently, where, these users are just consumer users. They're using their phone, you don't know who they are. And that started when we started working together, is to build that sort of identity layer. How do you KYC these people? And we started using more on the governance side of things, where NDC is our sort of like small sort of experiment around decentralized governance. So you need to prove that a person is real, right? So the person that's voting is not a bot, right? That's the first one that we came up with. And then Near Tasks is the other one, where there's a lot of bots that could label data, right? So you want to prove that you're human to label that data, because it impacts the data that's come into the machine learning models. And we think about that in the Near ecosystem, and then how do we take that outside? Like, how do you abstract the chain? And if you've done KYC at Fractal, how do you go to Ethereum or anywhere else and use that KYC to not to do that stuff again, right? So that's why we're excited about like the whole sort of this decentralized identity and aggregating the identity too. So yeah, that gives a bit of where we are.
Thank you. And we're talking about blockchains. We're talking about identity and private data of people. So of course, a big topic that comes afterwards, it's privacy. So now we are actually going to allow people to have their information, share it across blockchains. And that's, well, it could be dangerous, right? And David here from Lit, you basically work on that, not only for identity, but you're looking at access management in Web3. How does this work? What do we need to really look for when it comes to, as humans, sharing our identity in the web, and how we can leverage technology like yours?
Yeah, totally. I guess just to address one thing from the previous question, then to talk about privacy, to me it seems like we have an industry-wide cold start problem, basically. Like, once there's 1,000 apps that are working on some interoperable standard or schema or whatever it might be,
it's not a tech problem.
It's not a tech problem. It becomes very obvious that the 1,001st app should dive into that ecosystem. And this is a thing that, like, this is the notion of crossing the chasm. This is the cold start problem, the chicken and the egg problem. But it's just super fascinating that because the whole story is around interoperability and composability, like, it's an industry-wide problem rather than any one individual operator or service provider. With that being said, Yeah, privacy is a vast topic. There's certainly a lot of different methodologies for doing privacy. We're just hearing about some ZK proofs in the last talk. What LIP provides in this context is something called identity-based encryption. You could think about this as rules-based or conditional encryption, where some person, Alice, can encrypt some data and client side on her computer and basically set a rule that says only people who hold the Alice NFT can decrypt this. That encrypted blob, that encrypted string, can be stored on a blockchain, on Arweave, on IPFS, on some centralized server, wherever. And then if Bob owns that NFT and shows up at a later date, Bob, the way that it works in Lit, Bob can basically sign a message after he has purchased Alice's NFT. He makes a concurrent connection to all of the nodes in the Lit network from his browser and says, hey, I'm Bob, I own this NFT, I meet the conditions for decryption. And then the way the system works is kind of a little bit like torrenting, in that Bob is now collecting authorizations from all of these independent nodes that are doing their independent verification. And this is the threshold aspect of multi-party computation, threshold secret scheme, which is the underlying technology that we're working with here, is that once Bob collects enough of those authorizations, what he has on his computer is a signature, and he can use that signature to decrypt the data that Alice encrypted. And this is something that we're really excited about, a number of our ecosystem partners are really excited about, because it's a method where you can have client-side encryption and then a client-side decryption from a dynamic, ever-changing party with no middleman in between that can read the data, because we've replaced that centralized middleman with this distributed system.
Awesome. And is this a system that you can use as well for compliance use cases? Like, let's say like someone comes to you and says, okay, but now we really need to see the data of this person. Is it something that can apply to that?
You mean like a government?
Yeah, like a government, for instance.
Not today. I mean, that could be encoded in, and if somebody wanted to when they create the rule set around who can decrypt this, if they want to have like Boolean logic that says you need to own Alice's NFT or have the SEC's key, then the SEC would be able to have access based on the rule set. But we're designing and building a distributed, fault-tolerant, uncensorable technology. The nodes are geographically distributed, and that's all by design. There's not like a backdoor, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing. I think of course, but the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think that there's something that still we don't agree as an industry, which is what is identity for in Web3? What's the main use case today? Is it civil resistance or is it compliance, actually? And we have seen a lot of developments in both of them, and I think it's an interesting topic. Maybe to do a quick poll here, if you have to choose one, civil resistance or compliance, what is going to solve the cold start problem that you were mentioning before?
I would say compliance.
Civil?
You say, what did you say? C?
Civil
Oh.
resistance.
I think it's purely to me the cold start problem is solved based on like application experimentation. That's what's so exciting about this event and the hackathons. Like those things are both cool. There's no doubt about that. But if we solve the civil problem, there's already some solutions out there like Gitcoin Passport and others, and we're seeing cool interactivity. But if you solve the civil problem, it doesn't de facto say, okay, now you can do interoperable data. For me, it's much more interesting to think about the application use cases. One that has come up a number of times, for example, is we've already seen the LLMs basically disrupt the whole search world. They're really cool. You can ask the whole internet in the set of human knowledge, like plain language questions. But then what's the next level on top of that? And so if we lived in a decentralized identity world where rather than you using Apple Notes and me using Roam Research and you using Notion, if our notes were all stored in the open web in a privacy-preserving way, and then you made a query and you were like, who's interested in threshold cryptography? And you could get web results back, LLM results back, and social results back because our data could be crawled in a privacy-preserving way. I just think that there's massive, massive ideas and opportunities that are worth exploring. And for me, that's pretty clearly the blocker. And that's like a big conversation that happens in spaces like this, which is what's the killer app? And so I feel like not to me, that's really the most interesting question, because then the other stuff will fall into place. Because what developers ultimately want is user attention, and that's like powers the whole economic cycle and venture capital around the whole system that we're existing in.
But I think we're getting wrong like we were speaking about privacy, and I think identity is the way we relate to others. Quite simple.
It's just all of it.
Right? It's how we relate to others. It's not just documents that verify that. But then identity makes us really easy to manipulate a lot, because if I go to the bar, I know the bartender and I know him pretty well. It's like, how is your family? How are your kids? Whatever. Maybe I get 2 shots, extra shots for free, and I can get that. And that's how like a little bit like privacy works. They've been convincing us a lot on like, no, give all of your data so we can give you things. And that's wrong in so many levels. And I'm really afraid that what I'm seeing in Web3 is trying to do exactly the same. The difference is right now, the information is yours and we are going to pay you for that. But anyway, you're not going to have privacy. And I'm really afraid that a lot of people is focusing on creating marketplaces for data and being able to use it for LLM and a lot of things. It can be really good for many things. By the way, I see a lot of use cases when it's amazing, like, I don't know, medical use cases or many things. But also at the same time, it's something that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's not a this year thing, but in 10 to 15 years, I think we'll be in a world where you can compute anything in a privacy-preserving way and then have a verifiable proof of that computation.
When homomorphic encryption, really?
FHE? I'm not working on that.
I know, but you know more about cryptography than I, so that's...
I mean, there's trade-offs with all of these things, right? Like even thinking about proving some individual data, there's like this heuristic that people use in startups, which is don't drive your kids to school in the Ferrari, right? There's also like the notion of what is the specific problem set? Does that specific problem set warrant a certain technology to be applied to it? For example, in the context of like rolling up state and like anchoring state from an L2 in Ethereum, really awesome place to use is EKP. If you're talking about running a bunch of complex computation based on somebody's spending in their fiat bank account, maybe too much tool to use as EKP there. So I think it's hard to answer in the general sense.
For now, maybe, right? I mean, mainly. It might get it, you might get better provers over time that, you can run this, right? So.
Yeah, I think, that's, the future is very hopeful, I think, around these topics. But we have been as well, homomorphic encryption has been, I don't know, the first time I heard it was 3 years ago, and still people are talking about it. However, today we have solutions that are amazing already and privacy preserving, they are compliant. Like for instance, Lucas, Safe was working with Gnosis Pay, for instance, in a very complex solution that looks very basic on the top. It's just a debit card, but it involves I don't know how many layers. And with Safe, you are doing some of that, like you're doing stuff around AML. Can you tell us a little bit more, how can you do this? So how can you make DeFi work in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, in general, when you have digital identity, you always have an account behind it. That's your messaging account, it's your bank account, it's your game account, it's your social media account. And with self-sovereign identity, we want to give the control of this account to the user, to the person who has this identity. And then you run into these challenges where like, okay, now you need to write down your seed phrase and store it somewhere secure. And like if you lose that seed phrase, your identity or identities are lost, and that's not something we want to see. And like Near has some nice kind of in-protocol solution for that with programmable accounts. Unfortunately, the EVM, as of today, doesn't have this. So Safe builds these programmable accounts that allow you to have more secure ways to control your accounts, which are then attached to your identities. And Safe is really meant to be this like use case agnostic smart account. So we also don't see us purely attached only to financial applications, but also within a game or like a coordination mechanism like a DAO. Like you always have this blockchain account, like this like usually the DAO treasury, which people look to, which is associated with the identity of this community and so on. And this we wanna essentially achieve that all EVM accounts are becoming smart accounts, just because the programmability creates better security, multi-factor authentication, hyper custody setups, recovery, and like a bunch of different things. And now coming back to the Gnosis Pay specific use case, there you want to have like a non-custodial neobank. That's the goal of Gnosis Pay, like a bank account that actually you own up to the very point where you pay at the merchant, and only then the digital assets are getting off-ramped and are paid via the Visa network. And I mean, Gnosis is taking care of all the integration to the Visa network with the integration with Monerium and so on, and Safe is really the underlying account and uses some of its programmability to guarantee that like you cannot double spend, you cannot go to the merchant and pay with the card and at the same time send out the assets from your account. But actually there's like some like time lock there involved that before you can make a transaction, like Gnosis Pay has enough time to actually withdraw the money to settle any transactions made in the Visa network. So that's one thing. And then, yeah, in general, Gnosis Pay uses this uses Fractal ID to say like it should be a modular neobank, so kind of integrating into the Visa network and having a debit card which can interact with that, but also having like a bank account, the fiat bank account that's associated with your non-custodial wallet, and you don't want to always do KYC with each one of them. So you want to have a portable identity or portable KYC that you can then kind of add these different modules over time, and I hope it's not going to stay with the ones that are currently there, but it's really going to be a bunch of new things where, yeah, it just saves a lot of money and a lot of time when you have a portable identity.
Yeah, and I think we have great solutions for compliance or for other applications that you were mentioning as well. Do you think that identity, decentralized identity, maybe question to Alton, is it actually going to be something that is going to be adopted in the next 1 year by all the blockchains? Like, do you think there's going to be an effort for that, or what needs to happen for this?
By 1 year?
In the next 1 year, yeah, 12 months.
Well, again, it's a coordination problem, right? I think tech is here. Like, we can provide a tech from Near protocol as well, like, you know, mentioned as well, like programmable keys. We do the KYC, but I guess, like, how do we coordinate the whole nodes, right? I mean, this is also an open question, I guess. Like, how do we ensure that this whole decentralized identity layer for you guys as well on the idOS is to, how do we ensure if I did something in one chain, I can take that to another? And this is going to be a huge problem with layer 2s coming in. Every chain is just like, you know, even though they're mostly EVM, it's still taking those assets. And we have our own solution for that, right? What we call is account aggregation, where you can control Bitcoin and sort of Ethereum and Near wallets and many more from just one Near account. But how do we do this as an ecosystem, right?
Do you think that we will need like KYC every Near account?
No,
No, I'm just asking, maybe that happens. They imagine that you need to KYC every wallet in every blockchain at some point because of the regulation. We have MiCA right now.
Depends on the use case,
yeah.
right? So if you want to pay people, if I want to pay someone from Turkey to, let's say, I don't know, somewhere else, I need to KYC them, right? It's better to do that compliantly. I guess if it's a random application like game, I'm sure, depends on the game though. You know, I don't want to go through that KYC. I can just be like, I don't want to do this anymore, right? So I guess for you guys probably it's the most important thing, right? It's like for safe and things like that, AML and KYC. So I guess like how do we work together to do that is the harder question.
Yeah, you touched into an important point, which is that there are layers of identity. You don't need to share the whole thing. You can choose what you share. There's technology around CK or maybe homomorphic encryption that can help us with that. But yeah, I think the future is bright in this case. We talked a lot, and I think we're in the last 3 minutes, but we talk a lot about identities for people, so for humans. And I heard on a panel the other day, and in the spirit of Web3, I'm gonna steal it, that everything has an identity. Like humans have an identity, things have an identity, but not everything has an identifier. And I think that Alex, you have been working on that. How having a semantic web and basically identifying different elements of it can help for the whole identity in Web3 to become a reality that everyone uses.
This is going to be quite complex, and I agree. Like, I've been working on identity, and my promise usually was not know your customer, but know your business. And also, there's a new regulation coming on right now that you need even the passport of any product. So this is going to be complicated. What I did at the beginning was like I thought about the semantic web, and I thought about like this framework to coordinate the schemas. And what I end up building, somebody told me it's like, this is like Notion, but self-sovereign. I love that definition. Somebody told me to that yesterday. But what we do is we create a framework where basically you have a unique name. What we do is we point that name. Right now we're using Arweave, so you point that name to a document on Arweave, and that document on Arweave, what it has is versioning, so it's version control. I'm trying to do GitHub for data. So everybody has control on their own documents. You have a name, and that document can be a startup, can be smart contract, can be, because we have identity for smart contracts. But because like every one of these documents is linked to its semantic meaning, to a schema, one or more schemas, and everybody can create the schemas. It's completely an open protocol. I can add things like, I don't know, security audits to my smart contract. We are doing a lot of crazy stuff. We integrated, I didn't tell you, but we integrated with BOSS in a way that we can add a document to every near account. We can link them. So basically that near account becomes something else, becomes like, I don't know, a startup, a DAO. And then one of the things we were working with the Ethereum Foundation is like the idea of creating a semantic blockchain explorer. Because then instead of seeing hashes, you see, because there's the proposal in this DAO, we did this and we send this money to, so exactly, we are adding a Leo and many other options, private options, so we can add QIC. And we want to be like this kind of aggregator, semantic aggregator. That's why I'm so concerned about standardization, because we can aggregate things like idOS could be there, and then I can have my name, it's Alex, but then Alex slash certificates points to a document that basically lives on idOS, and we can verify things. And because everything is semantic and has a schema, we can build bridges between them. So it's quite complex, but the idea is like, why don't we bring the semantic web on-chain? And we're speaking mainly about public data at this moment, but we can also bring a layer that basically, well, it's the same that I said before. It's not about the technology to verify credentials. It's about how do we create credentials that help people. So that's a little bit the idea.
Awesome, thank you very much. I think we have run out of time. I don't know if anyone has any last words that you would like to say.
I mean, it's such an interesting topic about identifiers for non-human objects, and like this is the whole notion of like the fourth industrial revolution around economic entities that work in an automated way that don't necessarily have an owner. Perhaps they have shareholders. You know, the classic example is like a self-driving car that knows when to go to the repair shop, knows when to fuel up, and doesn't necessarily de facto have an owner, but it is running as something in the physical world based on code. And we're starting to see like the early examples of that, of essentially non-player characters in on-chain games or inside of autonomous worlds. And so for me, just as it relates to like these identifiers for non-human things, there's definitely a movement towards there being more and more. I don't think we'll ever get to the world where everything has an identifier, certainly, but even if you like look at the work that Canon is doing around cameras, they're starting to include secure enclaves such that there can be key material in the camera. And now we're like, okay, every photo that you take with this digital camera now has an identifier. And there's a longer story around fake news and all that kind of stuff.
Right? I think was from Stanford.
Second?
Yeah, like you can sign the picture. I think Kodak has something.
Yeah, a number of like camera teams are working on that. They use an enclave and they just are signing it. And then there's the C2PA, the Content Provenance Authority folks. That's like Adobe and Microsoft. They've currently integrated that with like Adobe Firefly, and that's like signing every new AI generated thing outside of that system. So I guess the only other remaining comment is just like we are definitely in a proliferation of identifiers moment as it relates to like identifiers for non-human objects and entities.
Awesome, and hopefully we don't get too stuck up with the standards, more on the how do we share these identifiers so we can have a real identity layer on the internet. Thank you very much. Thank you, David, Lucas, Alex, Alton. Thank you to have you here. And even though the open bar is still open, there are still drinks. We have another great panel coming now, so stick for it. Thank you.